How exactly did a racist maniac who once slept on park benches and begged for money rise to become the absolute dictator of his country? Here we look at 9 reasons why Adolf Hitler was elected as leader of Germany. Today's video was requested by Ren. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comment section below. Number 9. Germany suffered a humiliating defeat in World War I. Towards the end of the First World War, Germany realized they were losing, so they agreed to sign an armistice to end all fighting. As the imperial government collapsed with the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, civil unrest and worker strikes broke out across Germany. Fearing a communist revolution similar to the one that happened in Russia, major parties quickly joined together to suppress the uprisings and establish the parliamentary Weimar Republic. The new government's first task was implementing the peace treaty imposed by the Allies. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, forced Germany to accept full responsibility for causing all losses and damage during the war. They were forced to dismantle their army, make substantial territorial concessions, and pay huge amounts in reparations. In addition to that, Germany lost over a tenth of all its territories and lost all of its overseas territories, which were taken over by the Allied nations. All of this debilitated Germany's already weakened economy, and its people felt deeply humiliated. The treaty left no one content, and contrary to the Allies' wishes, Germany refused to forever be pacified. The country was not permanently weakened, however, and many nationalists and veterans who suffered humiliation sought for a way out. Number 8. Exploitation of the stab-in-the-back myth. Many German nationalists wrongly believed that the reason they lost the war was because they were betrayed by politicians and protesters, especially those who brought down the monarchy. They denounced the government leaders who signed the armistice and peace treaty, referring to them as criminals. This notion of Germany losing the war due to betrayal is commonly known as a quote-unquote stab-in-the-back myth. The stab-in-the-back myth then began to focus its blame almost exclusively towards Jews and communists residing in Germany. For Adolf Hitler, who fought in the First World War, these views became an obsession. His bigotry and paranoid delusions led him to hate the Jews, and his words found resonance in a society with a growing anti-Semitic community. Number 7. The Nazi Party's rising popularity. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, or simply the Nazi Party, was established in 1920. It emerged from a populist and nationalist culture that focused heavily on anti-Semitic and anti-communist themes. Hitler joined the party early on as member number 555 and quickly launched himself into its leadership, using his manipulative public speaking methods to draw in large crowds. Hitler and his party denounced both communism and capitalism as part of a large Jewish conspiracy to destroy the nation. The Nazi Party was not immediately popular, but gained much attention after their unsuccessful attempt at overthrowing the German government. In 1923, 2,000 men, alongside prominent Nazi leaders, marched into the center of Munich, planning to seize the city and use it as its base to march against the central government. The attempt failed, Hitler was sent to prison, and the Nazi Party was banned. However, the incident, as later stated by Hitler, had many positive benefits. Hitler became widely known not only throughout Germany, but across the world. His publicized trial gave him the chance to express his sentiments to the nation. During his time in prison, Hitler produced his autobiography Mein Kampf. Hitler was released within less than a year, and in 1925 refounded and reorganized the Nazi Party, with himself as its undisputed leader. He also learned that his path to power was to be through legitimate means, and he changed tactics to rely on heavy propaganda. Number 6. German people were suffering due to economic collapse. The 4-year-long war had weakened Germany's economy, and the war reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles made the situation worse. Unable to raise enough taxes, the Weimar government resorted to printing money. This led to great hyperinflation throughout the early 1920s, making massive amounts of banknotes utterly useless. The hyperinflation eventually ended, and government debt was cleared, but at a huge cost. The citizens' savings were lost, and they resented the government deeply. But the country's economic troubles were not over. The Great Depression of the early 1930s hit Germany hard, when investors from outside withdrew their money from Germany, causing a banking crisis. Industrial and business failures were widespread, and in 1932, the unemployment rate reached nearly 30%. This political upheaval was what led to Hitler's coming of power. Hitler used this issue heavily in his campaigns, and his promises to revive the German economy became a large factor in his electoral success. Number 5. The spread of anti-Jewish sentiment. By the early 20th century, hundreds of thousands of Jews had already integrated into German society. In fact, the Jews in Germany were the most integrated in all of Europe, but many continued to perceive them as outsiders. Many Jews were rather wealthy and successful, a fact which led to ungrounded accusations of subversion and war profiteering. All these conspiracy theories were born out of anger, fear, and hatred. With the rise of the Nazis and their explicitly organized anti-Semitic programs, anti-Jewish propaganda expanded rapidly. Nationalist pamphlets and newspapers referred to Jews as dirty citizens, and they were often depicted as hideous and badly dressed people in Nazi cartoons. This anti-Jewish propaganda endlessly blamed them for causing Germany's defeat in the previous World War, and for causing the subsequent economic crises. The groundless hatred towards Jews was exploited endlessly by Hitler and the Nazi Party throughout their campaigns, which led them to garner votes from many of the country's conservatives and nationalists. Number 4. The Nazi Party steadily won increasing votes in elections. The ruling government proved unable to handle Germany's economic crisis well, while opposition parties were too fragmented. This is where Hitler and his Nazi Party came in. Hitler took advantage of the people's anger, offering convenient scapegoats for everyone to blame, and promised to restore Germany to its former glory. Within just 4 years, the Nazi Party increased their parliamentary votes from just 3% to 36%, making them the largest political party in parliament following the 1932 federal elections. Hitler ran for president earlier that year, but lost to Paul von Hindenburg, the incumbent president. But with 36% of parliamentary seats, Hitler had already demonstrated the extent of his support. The following year, political advisors and business leaders hoped to channel Hitler's popularity for their own goals, so they pressured President Hindenburg to make Hitler Chancellor of Germany. Hindenburg reluctantly obliged, and thus, in January 1933, Hitler assumed the position of the second most powerful person in Germany. Number 3. The Nazis shamelessly used violence. Although the Chancellor had limited powers as only the head of parliament, Hitler expanded his powers little by little. The Nazis had a paramilitary group known as the Sturmabteilung, or SA, known for the extreme brutality. During the elections, the SA occasionally clashed violently with the communist paramilitary and openly carried parade daggers to intimidate their opponents. After gaining a majority in parliament, they became increasingly aggressive. They raided newspaper publishers that criticized their views, crashed political meetings held by the opposition, and fought protesters in the streets. Jewish people and their establishments were often attacked and robbed. The SA's illegal activities were often overlooked by the police force, whose members had either become Nazis or supported their cause. The Nazis even used the SA to threaten and intimidate politicians and members of parliament to force them to pass laws that favored the Nazi cause, sometimes even threatening to murder them and their family members. Number 2. Burning of the Reichstag building and passing of emergency law. February 27th, 1933. A large fire breaks out in the middle of the night inside the Reichstag building, the German parliament's assembly location. The Nazis stated that they had caught a Dutch communist as a perpetrator. The Reichstag fire was used as evidence by Hitler that communists were plotting against the government and convinced the government to grant him emergency powers to deal with the situation. To this day, nobody knows for sure who really started the fire, and some speculate the Nazis were really behind it. Within a matter of months, freedom of press was completely abolished, and the Nazis and state police rounded up and imprisoned communists and communist sympathizers across the nation. This included members of parliament from the Communist Party of Germany. With their rivals gone, the Nazi Party gained a majority in parliament and was able to pass the Enabling Act of 1933, which gave Hitler's cabinet ultimate power to make any law without legislative consent. In other words, Germany had officially become a dictatorship under Hitler. Freedom of press was totally abolished, and other parties were disbanded, making Germany a single-party state. Anti-Jewish laws were passed, and many of Hitler's rivals, along with potential threats to him, were arrested and executed. Number 1. President Hindenburg's death and the establishment of Führer office. At the time of his presidency, Hindenburg was already an ailing old man in his 80s. The only reason he ran for a second term was to prevent Hitler from taking power. He remained in office until his death at the age of 86 from lung cancer, 1 year after the Enabling Act was passed, which gave the Nazis full power. Upon hearing that Hindenburg was on his deathbed, Hitler quickly passed a law that stipulated that upon Hindenburg's death, the offices of President and Chancellor would be merged into one title known as the Führer. This is the title Adolf Hitler is mostly known for, as head of both state and government, an absolute dictator of Germany. As history witnessed, the Führer would go on to become one of the worst villains known to man. He brought the entire world to war and caused the deaths and suffering of millions. Looking back, it is disturbing to see how he started it all by giving speeches that exploited people's fears and ignorance to drive their support behind him and his party. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, many intellectuals and good-willed people endorsed him just to be on the right side of public opinion. They assured themselves that his crazy rhetorics were just for show, and he would lead the country to greatness. Today, Hitler's rise to power remains a reminder of how even one of the most democratic governments could evolve into the most repressive and brutal totalitarian regimes by a leader who exploited the fears, angers, and ignorance of the people.
One of the most common consequences of Dermatobia hominis infestation is the development of an affliction called myiasis. The larvae may parasitize various areas of the human body. Their entry points may be unbroken skin, open wounds or lesions, the nose, or the ears.